Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. I don't know what episode number this is. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very special guest, the editor-in-chief of the website, thegamer.com, Stacey Henley. Stacey, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I emailed you a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I've been kind of just probing out and reaching out to just various people to try to get them on the show to talk about all sorts of things. And we're talking about psychology of games, and we're talking about the economics of games. We just did one on the labor unions and the labor movement in games. And I wanted to talk about games journalism, specifically with someone in the mix. I am no longer in the mix, and so I don't think I have, I think I'm out of touch, frankly, with what games journalism it has turned into, what it's turned into, what its current role is and all of that. And I feel like you and others would have a much better frame of reference for these things. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. And tell us a little bit about yourself, just so the audience knows who you are.
Sure, yeah. As Colin said, I'm editor-in-chief of The Gamer. I've been editor-in-chief of The Gamer since, I think, September of last year, but I was at The Gamer before that from February onwards, just as a features writer, features editor. I freelanced it. I mean, most gaming websites that you've heard of, I've freelanced for. IGN, Polygon, Eurogamer. Been working in the industry for 4 years now, I think. So a lot of the time that I've been in the industry has been during the pandemic, so a lot of the typical industry stuff, trade shows and E3 and all those kind of things haven't really been happening. So I've experienced most of the industry as it's been online, which is where it's obviously moved to. Is a big split, I think, in media these days with traditional media, legacy sites, and sites like The Gamer that are in the same realm as those big legacy sites like Polygon and IGN, and then the less traditional media like things like this. Podcasters, YouTubers, and I think there's just quite a big split between the audiences of those two things. I think the audiences of independent media and media like this, YouTubers and podcasts, tend to have a quite low opinion of journalists, and I hope that by being here, I'm not so naive that we're going to change the games industry in 45 minutes, but I think that by being here, I can show that we're not all as terrible as people think they are, and I can very much protect my writers and myself and my colleagues from getting a lot of the blowback that we get a lot of the time, and to listen and to be heard about how games media has changed and why people do it.
Well, I'm so glad that you left it just like that, because I wanted to ask you what you felt like games journalism even was. I agree that there is a huge split between audiences. I think it splits many ways. It's like almost like a Venn diagram. I think some of it's absorbing other parts of it, et cetera, and so on. Social movements, political movements, all these kinds of things.
Absolutely.
But I wonder what you think the purpose of, if it's too broad of a question to ask, what the purpose of games journalism today is today in modernity, then do you feel the purpose of your website and the work you're trying to do to submit some pie slice to this larger circle of games coverage? How do you feel like you fit in there?
I think The Gamer's got a lot of quite young writers. For a lot of the writers, it's their first editing job. So if you look at a lot of the traditional legacy sites, they have great staff, they have great writers, but a lot of them have been around for 10, 15 years. Even if they've not been at the site they're at for 10, 15 years, they've been in quite senior roles for 10, 15 years. And I think there's a bit of a problem that a lot of younger freelancers aren't getting a chance to come through. I think The Gamer gives people a chance to come through and do that in terms of on my side as far as the industry goes. And I think as far as our audience goes, we write news and features and things with a viewpoint, and people like that viewpoint, people don't like that viewpoint, but I'm quite proud that we have one. I think there are a lot of, on both sides of the split, whether it's the YouTubers and the podcasters or the traditional websites, there's a lot of them that perhaps don't really have a viewpoint beyond, I love this game. And that's fine. That's certainly fine as a player to just play games and enjoy them. That's why people make them. They're made to be enjoyed. But, if we want to see games as a piece of art, if we want to take them seriously, we have to be able to be critical of them and still love them. Like I've got something like 125, 130 hours in Cyberpunk. And I think people who've read my work would be surprised by that because I've written a lot about it. I've criticized it a lot for various elements of it. And I think there's an impression that games journalists, especially young games journalists who are more like people at the gamer who have a viewpoint on things, who maybe add politics and gender and sexuality and those kind of things into their writing. I think there's this feeling that they actually hate games, that they've joined games media to tell everyone that games are bad and that you shouldn't play them and that they're violent and just like a new version of Jack Thompson. And that's not really what we're trying to do. We criticize these games and we interrogate them because we love them so much. I've written way more about games that I, feel really strongly for, but see the flaws in, beyond just games that I love. I struggle to write about games that I love because what do I say about them other than this game is good? Occasionally I write an article saying, I love this game, it's good, you should play it. But most of the stuff that I write is, this game is really, really good, but here are some things that are probably worth discussing about it on a deeper level than how fun it is to shoot people, or to climb up the walls, or to, smash open the boxes, or whatever the objective is in the game.
Well, I don't really disagree with anything you said, because one of the things I wanted to credit you for at the top was when I was kind of researching your site and reading and poking around it. I found this quote, and it says, quote, "The gamer is pro-diversity and has published features on racism, transphobia, and intersectionality underlining this point of view," end quote. And I found that at the top of like your mission statement.
Yeah.
So whether or not people agree with the mission statement or not, there's no doubt that there is one, and you have a right to that mission statement and to that perspective. And I also totally agree with you, and I think most of my audience would as well, that games are inherently political. The creation of games is political. The publishing of games and the funding of games is political, of course. And not every game comes out as a political product, but you can analyze many of these games through a social lens, an anthropological lens, whatever the case might be, an historical lens. And I love doing that too. And the games I've written are really political. So I'm very happy, like openly political. So I'm very happy to contribute to that as well. Why do you think, in identifying the split between, let's say, the podcasters, the YouTubers, and then the legacy media, which I come from technically the legacy media, which is strange. I feel like no one would even know that about me if it wasn't something that was already known. No one, in other words, would guess that about me. Why do you think that there is such an ideological divide? Because beyond the analysis of games as a political product or a social product that is worth analysis, and I think that you and I agree there completely.
Yeah.
It seems like the people that agree on that front still split right wing towards podcasting and YouTubing, left wing towards legacy media. Why do you think that is? Because that's one of the things that frustrates me so much. I want to see that mixed up a lot. I want to see it bandied about such that we're getting a lot of different perspectives. And I've tried to contribute to that with Chris Raygun, the co-host of Sacred Symbols, is a devout left-wing, borderline, I would say, socialist person. And it brings great balance to our show. We do that intentionally. Why do you think why do you think these silos have existed, and why they reinforce themselves as opposed to opening themselves up?
I think looking at the YouTubers and podcasters and those kind of things first, if you look at the ones who are really successful, someone like Joe Rogan is probably the most obvious successful podcaster, successful guy in independent media. The algorithm on YouTube and podcast sites tends to favor, for whatever reason, I don't know the reason behind it because I'm not technically minded enough, seems to favor a lot of right-wing journalism. There are successful leftists on YouTube. I'm sure we could all name a handful. But I think in general, the algorithm tends to favor right-wing media. And also, I think because there are more left-wing journalists in traditional media, a lot of people who disagree with that they start off on their own. It becomes this vicious cycle of a lot of people go to YouTube and podcast independent media because not just because they have different opinions, but I think when you look at, not necessarily your audience, I don't know them all personally, but if you look at a lot of the audience and comments on pundits on YouTube and podcasts, there's a lot of hate for traditional media. That's kind of one of the reasons that I'm here, I suppose. I get sent a lot of death threats. Me and my writers get sent a lot of death threats for really silly things. Like we got sent one the other day because someone said there should be a new type in Pokemon. Like that's not worth sending a death threat over.
No, of course not.
And I kind of,
by the way, really nothing is worth sending a death threat over.
Of course, yeah. And I kind of hope that by being here, the next time someone is about to send an angry message to one of my writers, they go like, "Oh, that's them who were on Moriarty. They were right. Them. They're a normal person, you know." Um, so I think part of the split is on YouTube and on podcasts and on things like that. The algorithm tends to favor right wing, so more not just for gaming stuff, but in general. So a lot of the audience is attracted to YouTube and podcasts. It means that people who are on the right or who have differing opinions to mainstream media tend to get more success, so they rise. So then more people who agree with them go over to YouTube, so then they rise. And then I think on as far as traditional media goes, I think, like I was saying before, a lot of young writers who are coming through, that's just something that people are, young people are very passionate about now. You know, we've seen a lot of demonstrations and protests and other things that have infused politics into our real lives. And I think it's not so much a case of wanting to make games political, it's that we have a lot of young people who are very politically minded, who grew up playing video games. You know, video games have been a big part of popular culture for the past kind of 30 years or so. So if you're under 20 or under 25, you grew up probably with a console in your house, whether it was a Nintendo 64 or a Nintendo Wii, you know, depending on how old you are. I think a lot of people are drawn to that. And I would suggest that most people probably get turned away from the left wing media, from traditional media, from mainstream media, and go towards these more independent journalists. And they tend to have more success. One, because the algorithm feeds them. Two, because the audience is already left for other reasons, not just for gaming. And three, because a lot of the people who are doing the left wing side of things, if you like, tend to be in traditional media. So it's a more open market to sweep up that audience that have rejected that.
Do you, as the editor in chief of a publication with a clear mission statement that might conflict with some of the social or it could be even geopolitical or whatever, foreign policy, politics, whatever people are bringing with them as baggage. Sure. Do you feel like it's incumbent on you to try to capture those people, or are you not interested in talking to them at all? Because what you're saying, I think, is 100% right, but no doubt in my mind also tinged with a bit of self-defeat, because it feels like, are you willing to fight for that audience? Do you want that audience? How do you capture that audience? Because I want your audience, like, definitely, you know, I definitely do. I want as many people as possible to listen to what we have to say, and to find what I think. And that's why I think we're growing so much, is because it's actually much more reasonable than people think it is, and much more fair. But I'll say right off the bat, I want everyone. So how do you feel about that?
How I feel about it is everyone at the site is allowed their own opinion. I never enforce my opinion on people, but obviously I think, because of the things I've just said, and because I recruit people who agree with our mission statement, we all have something of a shared point of view on most major politics. I want everybody to be able to write how they feel. I don't want anybody to write to capture audiences, and that's not just on politics. That's on anything, on any topic that we do. You know, if you're genuine about things, you'll never have to remember what the lie was. So I want people to be able to write exactly how they feel, exactly what they think. Obviously, you know, within journalistic reason, you can't just libel people. But I'm more interested in us being a site that can stand up and defend itself. You know, the Gamer comes from a little bit of a clickbait history a few years ago, before the editor chief before he took over. The site was kind of just a content mill, kind of going nowhere. And me and the guy before me have worked very hard, and all the writers with us, to make it into something that we can be proud of. And I would like to think that is enough to attract people. I'm not really interested in appealing to people who completely disagree with us. I'm very interested in us being able to defend every single thing that we write and say, yes, we agree with it, we feel this, we believe this, we think this reflects positively on us, on the site. And I think that will bring an audience. No, our audience has been growing since we stopped being a content mill, before I was there, but since the site stopped being a content mill and started producing actual journalism, actual writing, things that had time and craft and had value to it, more people have been reading us. So I would if people hear me on this and they think that I'm a pretty reasonable person, they go and check out the game. Obviously, that's great, but I'm mainly here to put across the side for the traditional mainstream media that we're a lot more reasonable than people think. I'm not really here on this podcast, particularly, to capture an audience as much as I am to put across what I think the mainstream media and the gamer stands for. And I think if people can identify with us, there are a lot, gaming is a lot more diverse these days. So I think if people can identify with what we're doing, we're going to find our audience just fine.
That's an interesting insight. I want to be clear, by the way, that I'm not so craven as to say I want to capture your audience with this literal conversation with you right
No,
now.
I know what you mean. No.
Yeah. I just want to make sure everyone understands from a 40,000 foot point of view.
I suppose what I mean is
call,
I'm kind of on your show, so I'm speaking directly to your audience.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not necessarily here to get them all, or even half of them, or even a quarter of them to come and read my stuff. I'm really here so that next time I get demanded to come on a podcast, there was no confrontation with this. I hadn't written any kind of spicy hot take, and like, come and debate me on this show. It was a very cordial offer. So the next time I get one of those kind of come and debate me on my show, I can kind of say, well, look, I've been on shows like this. I've put my side across. I've explained why I do what I do. And also that just to show that we're a bit more, there's real people. I'm the kind of person that a lot of traditional gamers, if you like, probably wouldn't see the appeal in. A trans woman editor-in-chief talks about politics, talks about gender in games, politicizes lots of things, doesn't just play games for fun, probably isn't as good at video games as a lot of them. But I can come here and have a reasonable conversation with you to listen and to be heard and to go from there, hopefully with people listening to this and deciding to treat my writers a little bit better as a result of it.
Yeah, well, I hope, first of all, no one deserves any disrespect. I don't even deal with social media anymore, but I've in the fall, I swore off public posting because it's just, in my opinion, it's toxic, of course, but also just parasocial. Like, I'm just sick of people thinking they're part of my friendships and shit and like have the right to tell me who I like and who. It's just but I generally keep my powder dry, or used to, even when I was on social media, until people would come at me. But some of your writers have come at me. So do you guys feel like you also should, I don't want to say be nicer. I don't know if that's the right term. Let me think about that. Is it up to you to kind of also try to extend a hand? Because I think a lot of people, maybe on quote unquote your side, look at a YouTuber like The Quartering or something, right? Who I think is, he has the right to say what he wants to say and all of that, but I'm not a fan of the content. I don't really feel like it has a cadence or a meaning other than poking and prodding. But that's fine. And he has an audience, but I feel like there's a conflation between that and then others who really do want to just have conversations and talk. You brought up the D word, debate, which I hate that word. And I always, people make fun of me even when I try to invite people on, be like, he wants to debate. And I'm like, not really. I kind of just want to hear. A lot of the conversations we have like this is usually just me listening. So do you feel like I was looking at some stuff. You have a writer, I don't know if he still works for you, named James Troughton, I think that's his name. He said Colin Moriarty literally has a villain's name. He's a walking comic book foil for who somehow has supporters. It's funny, I guess, and I do have a comic book villain's name, but that contributes to the toxicity that's driving us apart, right?
Sure. I mean, look, you asked about extending a hand. I would say what I'm doing is I'm coming on this show to talk to you. And I think there is a difference between you and the likes of The Quartering. I would not you could not pay me to go on The Quartering show, Like, I think people like The Quartering and other people in that section, they never say go and attack this person, but I've been quarteringed a few times, and what they tend to do is, one, they make the video, but also they post like a section of the article on Twitter. They rarely tag you, but they always leave your bio in, and then normally the bio in's got like a little link to your Twitter. There's a very targeted attack system that I think a lot of those types of YouTubers and the like have, where they never tell their followers to go and attack, but it's very coded that that's what they're trying to do. They take snippets out of context and they put their names in. I would like gaming to be less toxic. That's why I'm on here. And I think you could scroll through my tweets for a very long time and you would not really find anything of me just going on and insulting somebody. I might have a point to make. I might kind of say this person said this and it's wrong for this reason, this reason, this reason.
Sure.
Or, if someone's someone's done like, I don't know, one of those like weird NFT projects, I might have just gone, this is a rubbish idea. Like, you know what I mean? But
Everyone hates those. We all agree.
yeah. So I think you'd have to go back a very long way if you ever found one at all to find me acting like that. So look, I hear what you're saying. I do think that we have a responsibility to try and to not just start things for no, not just to kind of decide you're on that side and I'm on this side, and therefore we're enemies and we can never have conversations like this. You know that when I say I'm on this show, I'm going to get a lot of blowback for this. Like, this is not
I
just
know.
damage free from me. I'm going to like say I was on this show, and I haven't told anybody I was on this. I've told nobody I was coming on this show because I knew I'd have to defend it, and I thought I'm going to have to defend it before. I'm going to have to defend it afterwards. I'd rather just defend it afterwards. Um,
Yeah, I like your point. I like that your perspective, and I'm sorry that that is true for you in your circle um, as well. But maybe we'll be an example. I mean, I don't know. It's not like we're going to agree on
maybe we
everything.
will change gaming in 45
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah, no, that's exactly. I mean, Stacey, that's exactly right. Like maybe it's just. I love that meme of the dude with the dominoes that get bigger and bigger, and you tip the little
Yeah,
one and then the big one.
this
So
is the
maybe it's just
starting point.
yeah, exactly. Because there's no doubt that we disagree on many an issue, but I feel like social media itself has just really ruined it. Because I remember being at IGN. I was at IGN as a freelancer and then as an editor for 12 years. And I was openly conservative and openly political, and no one cared. I mean, it's not that I was annoying, I guess, about it or whatever, but and maybe some people thought I was, but I had like a Ron Paul sign at my desk, and I have historical tattoos on my, and no one cared. And it just seems like my opinion about myself personally is that when Trump came about, I was the closest thing anyone had known as being a Trump voter in the industry, even though I'm not. And a lot of that stuff got taken out on me. But I was reading some of your work, and there was an awesome quote that you had in a recent piece of yours, and I wanted to read it. You
Okay.
say, quote, there are a lot of gamers who see journalists as the enemy. And this is what you're talking about. In a
Yeah.
way, I see their perspective. Some gamers care only about enjoying games, and that's it. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But when some journalists seek to analyze the themes and break down the game to its smallest parts, it can get in the way of simple enjoyment, end quote. This is so eloquently said. Why can't it be communicated like this more often? I guess it goes into what I was saying earlier. Like,
Hmm.
if we can just cut through the bullshit, if someone read that paragraph, if they just cut through the clutter of, and it's no disrespect meant, but the clutter of politics and intersectionality and whatever things, or put a patina over it. This is a really reasonable statement. I want people to read it. I want people to be able to find it. Um, is what you're is what you're doing in the way you're covering games now sustainable, or will it require the Venn diagram to grow just a little bit? And how can we get people to read this statement and take something reasonable out of it, even though they think that they might disagree with you on face value?
I think that's really two questions. I think in terms of is the way games journalists operate now sustainable? I would like to think it is. Obviously, we've seen US Gamer close a little while ago. A couple of
Mm-hmm.
indie sites have closed, but I mean, US Gamer they were part of a bigger network that made a lot of its money off events. There has been a once in a lifetime event that has meant that in person events are suddenly nowhere near as profitable as they once were because people couldn't go to them because of COVID. And even now they're still restricted. So I don't like people who go on Twitter. If any of my writers are listening to this, they'll know. But I don't like people who go on Twitter and say my site's got great numbers. Our site's doing really well. It's got these numbers. But over the past 3 years, the Gamer has tripled its viewership. The Gamer is a bit of an odd case because, like I say, it was taken over by Kurt and then it was taken over by me, and we had a lot of space to grow. You know, a site like IGN that already has a huge audience that does not need fixing in the way the Gamer did is never going to triple its output in 3 years. It's reached that ceiling where that's
Of course.
impossible. But I think in terms of sustainability, we're getting a lot more people playing games now, and I think we're getting a lot more people who are prepared to read them in different ways. And in some ways, the people who preferred the old style of media, you know, the old PlayStation magazines with the stickers inside and
Yeah, I used
CD-ROMs.
to get PSM. I love that
Yeah,
magazine.
and I think in some ways, YouTube and podcasts has kind of replaced that side of things. Um, you know, because we consume YouTube in the same way that we used to consume magazines. We pick them up, we read them, we listen to them. Um, I I often listen. Most things that I watch on YouTube are just like 5 minute shorts. Because that's all I kind of have time for. I use it to kind of fill in time basically what Quibi was for, but Quibi was terrible. That kind of thing. So I think that audience, which probably skews a little bit older if you look at the demographics, has gone to YouTube and podcasting, and then a lot of the I think a lot of new readers who are coming through, some of them are getting funneled straight through to YouTube because they're watching Twitch and then they're watching YouTube, and then that's a pretty closed ecosystem that's going to sustain itself because people are always going to watch streamers. That's a big industry that's not going anywhere. But I think for people who want to read gaming websites, I don't know the metrics of other sites or how other sites have gotten on. My understanding is from watching people on Twitter say their site's doing well. I think a lot of sites are getting bigger and growing. I think there's a bigger audience now, so that that sustainability is coming from the fact that there are more people flowing into it. So even though there are people leaving traditional games media to listen to podcasts, to watch YouTube, I think they're being replaced by other parts of the audience.
I think so too. I came from the audience, so yeah. So that's. I mean, I'm an old man now, but that was true at one time. I wonder, in talking about the industry, one of the things I find interesting is the way games media and kind of, let's say, the left-wing viewpoint, the progressive viewpoint, the American progressive viewpoint, which I know a lot of people question.
The American left is like the British center, but yeah,
exactly. No, that's exactly right. So I that's like my only familiarity with left-wing politics in the main, but this seems to all line up with like corporations at the top, the developers and publishers. Everyone seems to be very supportive. They're all saying the right things. They're waving their gay pride flags and doing all the appropriate things, saying the right things. I wonder if you feel like this is authentic. Because I feel like it's great. I'm personally very libertarian, so I think people should just do whatever they want. That's totally fine as long as you're not hurting anyone. But I used to, when I lived in Santa Monica for a few years, San Francisco is different because I lived there for 10 years and it's obviously a very gay city. But Santa Monica, I used to think it was funny, whatever gay pride month or whatever it was, you'd walk down and everyone would have their gay pride flags out, and you can see that they were folded and creased and they were brand new. And then the end of the month, everyone would put them away and they would put up the next thing, and it felt like bullshit. And I wonder how you feel the industry really is on the social issues that matter to you, and if you feel like the change we're seeing is authentic, or if it's more like corporate lobbyist, very slick marketing, and maybe underneath the surface things are a lot more like, let's say, Activision Blizzard than we think.
I think it's a little bit of both. There are certainly I think what always amuses me is that there are both the left and the right, if you like. Let's divide it just very simply into the left and the right for now. Both the left and the right often complain when there's a new gay character, but for completely different reasons. There are some people on the right who just don't like that this character wasn't gay in the comics, or they shouldn't be gay now, or we have enough gay characters, it's being taken over. And people on the left kind of complain about the way progress is done. So if we let's take a famous example that everyone's going to know, the Lev in The Last of Us, right? Lev's a trans character, never says the word transgender once. A 25-hour game, he is probably got the third most lines, fourth most lines maybe. Never once does he or anybody in the game say the word transgender. I always find stuff like that really strange. Like, they keep all these normal words, like all the guns still have the same names. They haven't like lost you haven't lost English. You still have an AK-47 called an AK-47. They haven't made up a new word for it, but the word transgender has kind of gone to the ether. So I think that was a pretty good portrayal. We saw Lev as more than his trauma. He was a real character. He had real lines. He was the favorite character. People really enjoyed Lev. I think a lot of people are hoping if we get a Last of Us 3, maybe Ellie's done, it's going to be Abby and Lev and, in their arc. But at the same time, if you told me there was a board meeting at Naughty Dog and they said a really good demographic that we can have is if we have a trans man in there. So let's get a trans man and then start from there. If you told me that was how Lev was created, and I have no idea if he was, I don't know how Lev was created. I haven't spoken to anybody who created him. If you told me he was created out of a boardroom and then, Druckmann and Hilliger got a hold of him and made him into a real character, I believe you. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. I was actually going through the the GLAAD Awards today. They were revealed yesterday or today for the nominees, and some of them are just characters who had like a bisexual flag in the background. And in some ways, I think that kind of feels more genuine because it's not really something you would notice. I feel like somebody somewhere
Yeah.
fought to have that put in there, as
Mm.
opposed to a character who says I am bisexual and wears a t-shirt and is very obviously bisexual, and probably a character basically who has the creases in them because they've just come out the air. They've just been put up for Gay Pride Month. So I think there's definitely a little bit of, I don't like to say the word forced diversity, but that's not really, I don't really have another word for it. I think there is a little bit of forced diversity where people want to make sure that they hit marketing quotas. I see that. I don't know if they do this in America, but in England, the Skittles packets turn white for Pride Month.
Oh, do they? I don't even know
Yeah,
if they do that here. I would
they
believe it.
they turn white because gay pride is the something like the gay community needs the rainbow. There's some kind of nonsense reason that is just buy more Skittles. And there are some characters that I feel are just kind of buy more Skittles. But I think when
Hmm.
we look at look at the indie scene, when they're not concerned about appealing to people. The indie people typically make games they want to make, and there's some constraints for budget or what they can do, or they need to sell enough copies to get the next one. But they don't put gay characters in to sell; they put gay characters in because they want to have gay characters in there. And I think we have those smaller pieces of progress that are people fighting for more representation, or those stories that really actively strive to tell stories. Something like Tell Me Why that came out a couple of years ago now, by Don't Nod. I think there are some real steps being made where there are developers are more diverse and are trying to tell their story a lot more. But at the very top, it's still run by corporations. It's still run by capitalists. Most studio heads are still straight men. And while they may be making decisions for people on their team, ultimately the stories that represent straight men are the kind of sad dad stories that we've seen a lot of. Bioshock Infinite, God of War, the first Last of Us, especially. Um, so I
Sad
think
dad
it's
story. I like
mixed.
that. That's funny.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit. I think it's a little bit mixed how progressive this progression really is.
Yeah, there's like a tension between the top and the bottom, I guess, because
Hmm.
there's certainly some sort of really crazy manipulation at the top, knowing that they can bean count. And then there are people really trying to do the work at the bottom. And I think that's why, because there's some conflict of like, well, there's trans characters in this and there's trans characters in that, but there's only like 1.5 million trans people in the United States. Like how many and I'm like, or people in the United States in the greater population. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that makes sense to me only because people are now able to tell these stories more openly. So there's just going to be a greater volume of the stories being told.
And I
And I
think
felt,
that's
oh, I'm
it.
sorry.
But I think that's it. Like this, there have been more characters coming out, but as a trans woman, I can't think of a AAA game that has a trans woman in. Can you? I can think of a few trans men. I think of The Last of Us. I can think of Dragon Age. I can think of Horizon Zero Dawn. I can think of Tell Me Why. If that counts as AAA with trans men. Trans women, no, not so
No,
much.
that's,
And
and I guess I can't. And that's so interesting because wouldn't it, trans women are really more visible than
far more.
trans men. And so you would think it would go the other way, that's actually an interesting point. And I was going to bring up, as far as the trans stuff in The Last of Us Part 2, see, this is what I think really underlined for me this very, no doubt, unavoidable, toxic, really hateful shit that goes on in the industry. Because what it really showed was everyone thought, and I don't want to spoil The Last of Us 2 for people who
Yeah,
haven't played it yet, but everyone thought that it was Abby
yeah,
that was the trans person. And I'm friendly with Neil, know a little bit about the game, all these kinds of things, and kind of keeping it in, especially knowing that The Last of Us in 2013 had spoilers that were totally wrong.
yeah,
I had to keep in mind, and inside being like, these spoilers are totally wrong. And it showed that people were just willing to attack what they thought was true based on misinterpreted, leaked information, and harbored some sort of hate inside of them. And they took it out on the wrong character, who was actually a woman, born a woman who maybe had a more male physique. And that, to me, was striking. And I hated that brought the game down, because it's, in my mind, one of the great games of all time. I absolutely adore that game.
yeah.
Um,
The
yeah.
all of the conversations around The Last of Us were really, really strange. Like it, in some ways, you often read stories, certainly I often read stories, where cisgender women, people who are born women, get kicked out of bathrooms because they look like men. People assume they're trans and they don't like them. And I think the same thing kind of happened with Abby. Abby's, like you say, she's got a buff physique, she's got big arms. everyone just kind of, that one must be the trans one, because that's what trans look like, and it couldn't possibly be this little boy.
Right. Who was also in the first or second trailer, so no one even made that connection,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
interesting.
It's not like this character hadn't been seen before. But just everything around that game was really weird. I think I wrote about this in that article that you quoted before. But whenever I wrote about The Last of Us last year or 2 years ago, God, when it came out, um, I would always get, if I criticized it, people would always bring up Ghost of Tsushima all the time. And then when I wrote about Ghost of Tsushima, people would always bring up The Last of Us. They seem to be positioned in this really weird war where I just thought both of them were quite good games. Like, my favorite PlayStation game that year was Final Fantasy VII. I didn't really have a horse in that race.
Yeah.
I
Also a
played
great game.
both of them. Like, I liked them. As I said at the very start, I wrote about both of them quite a bit. I was still freelancing at the time, so I didn't get to write them probably as much as I want, excited to do guides and news and other things, because I had to make money. Which I have the luxury now as a doing features to be able to write opinion pieces a lot more. So that's a lot
I'll
more
let
of
you
what I
know that
write.
I wrote 94 strategy guides, so I feel your pain.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
hard work.
Yeah, you don't get time to do the analysis as much when you have to. How do you find this? How do you find Nathan Drake's ring in the bank? So I think The Last of Us was just incredibly toxic for so many reasons. There was obviously the crunch thing beforehand, which um, a lot of people were very sour on the game just because of that. In some cases, reasonably so. In some cases, probably unreasonably toxic. I think a lot of people didn't like that it changed from Joel to Ellie, and that made people angry. People didn't like that it was going to be Abby, and then obviously spoilers, but what Abby does, and then having to play as Abby and not liking that. And I think it was a really weird moment where, because everyone was playing that game, it was a huge game. It wasn't even just like a AAA game. It was the game.
Mm.
It was possibly the game of the PS4 era. That's how big it was.
Yeah.
And I think so many people brought reasons to dislike it into it from all different directions, that there was no way to have a sensible conversation about The Last of Us. And I still don't think there is.
No, I don't either. Actually, on our side, we usually do a spoiler cast / review discussion for every big game that we can. And that one we did two, because people were so mad at the first one. We did a second one that made it even worse. And everyone even got more mad. So like, to just do more information. And it's a game that has this endless appetite. And for me to kind of maintain this frame of respect I have for the game as just this wonderful experience, I have to stay away from. It's one of those rare games where you're actually annoying me. Like, where I usually things roll off my shoulders. I'm like, yeah, you like this, you don't like this, that's totally fine, but you're actually annoying the shit out of me with this particular thing. I'm wondering what games, because we haven't talked so much about just games generally. I mean, what games
No?
are you looking forward to this year? I mean, are there any games that stand out to you that you are excited to play above all others?
Sure. I think partly because the pandemic delayed a lot, and partly because a lot of games that probably could have been 2021 releases were brought forward for the launch dates. Like, an unusual year, Demon Souls and Miles Morales probably wouldn't launch on the same day. So
Right.
2021 was relatively barren compared to some of the years, certainly compared to, say, 2018 and 2020, when we had really big titles coming out. So because of that, we have some huge games coming out this year, more than usual. So it's kind of hard to just put your hat on one. I think the one I'm most looking forward to is probably Horizon.
Yeah, definitely.
I've always defended Horizon. It seems to be a game that people have soured on, as it was possibly the first great game of the PS4, and then more games came out that were better than it, and everyone's kind of decided as a result, Horizon's now terrible. But it's always been a game that I've really enjoyed, and I think this one seems to be growing in the right direction. My problem with, obviously, anyone who reads the game regularly, which I probably assume is not that much of a crossover with your audience, if I'm honest. But I write about Pokemon a lot, but I'm just kind of worried that this new one, I applaud them for doing something different, but I can never really trust that Pokemon's going to get it right. As much as I love it and I play every single game that comes out, and I download the free cafe game because I like Pokemon that much, I just don't trust it to be good ever. And it always surprises me when it is. Um, and then obviously Suicide Squad and Gotham. I love those types of games. I think they're both. The superhero game used to be a bit of a cash in. And then I think we had the Batman and the Arkham trilogy. We had Guardians last year, was brilliant. I think superhero games are a lot better than they used to be, and it's exciting to see them hit that kind of point that movies probably hit 5, 10 years ago, where they can actually be relied upon to be solid now instead of being 50-50.
I'm glad you brought up Horizon. Horizon to me is really exciting. I'm actually I love platinuming games, and
Mm.
I platinumed Horizon when it came out, so that usually ruins my want to go back and play a game again. But I feel like I need to actually remind myself almost of what it is,
Mm.
because it's actually been quite some time. And when you think about just the sheer amount of games you play in between, especially for people like you and me that are really in it, I'm like,
Mm.
shit, I don't even really remember Horizon, to be honest. Like I remember the beat to beat stuff in a way, but
Yeah.
I got to get back to it. But how do you feel about Aloy as like a powerful female protagonist? Is this like a good model for representation in games? I feel like she's pretty awesome and quite unoffensive, so maybe a nice stepping stone for more representation. Does she bring any sort of positivity in that realm to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think look, there are more female characters than usual. As we said before, but there being more trans characters around these days, and even going back from that, going back to a bigger minority, if you like, in gaming, there are far more female characters in games these days. But Aloy still kind of stands out as of the modern era, not going back to Samus or Lara Croft.
Right.
Aloy is the big one recently, I would say, even more so than Ellie, who kind of came up as Joel's sidekick and then got her own game, and then there was Abby. Um, I really like Aloy. I think she, Ashley Birch is brilliant, and as she is in kind of every role that she does. Um, she's a very enjoyable character, and I think obviously the whole thing that she's kind of Native American but kind of not is just a bit odd. But I think Aloy as a whole is a character that a lot of people can root for. She's not just like half naked all the time, like a lot of kind of classic female characters were. She's very likable. She's quite dry and sarcastic. She's not just sweet or innocent or dull. In a way, I think when you try and design a character to appeal to a new audience, it can kind of come across as making them a little bit boring because they need to kind of hit this thing on the checkpoint and this thing and this thing. Aloy never feels to me like she was designed by a committee. She just feels like a character that they made because they wanted to, and that's really all I ask for from a character.
Yeah.
Them to have a personality and to not feel like they were designed in a boardroom, even though all characters kind of are, because that's how character art works.
Sure. I wanted to ask you about this. I actually forgot about this because we were going down some of the more AAA stuff, but as I own co-own an indie studio, so
Mm.
I'm in that realm. And your writer, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. I think Ki Hoon Chan.
Their name.
Their name, sorry, Ki
Yeah,
Hoon
that's right.
Chan.
Ki-Hoon Chan, yeah.
They wrote Sifu's Kung Fu Brawling is made by a studio full of white developers. This got people upset. The observation I don't really mind. My curiosity here is, we were talking about Aloy. Obviously, Gorilla is mostly male. They do a pretty good. The character was created by a male. The guy isn't there anymore. I read this and I was kind of concerned just because the one protagonist that I've really made in our games is Sabrina, who's the person in my masthead on Twitter and on other social media, and she's a woman. And I write her, and I'm like, is that not adequate? Like, and then when I think about the new game we're making, which we haven't announced yet, the main character there's actually a whole swath of them, but white girl and black man, and I'm writing them, and I feel like this comment seems to be closed-minded and irrelevant. And I wonder if you agree, like, why does it matter? Sure, certainly it's notable, I guess, that Sifu is made by white people, but why does it matter? And I'm wondering if you have an answer for that, or if maybe you even disagree with her, or I'm sorry, their opinion.
I mean, I don't agree with the opinion because it wasn't an opinion. It was a fact. It is a team made by a bunch of white developers, and they did expand on reasons why that concerned them. I think it's important to note that Kuhn is from Singapore, so they are not part of traditional games media. And it's that pretty going back to what I was saying before about the game of giving people that opportunity and that start. There are perspectives that we don't often see in traditional media. Even amongst traditional media where it's the left and it's perhaps more diverse and etc. etc. I think place like Singapore, which has some indie studios, but really is underrepresented in games development as a whole, considering how technically advanced Singapore is as a nation. I think it's worth listening when someone from Singapore says, "It concerns me that this studio focused on Asian culture, Asian aesthetics, Asian history, is made by a team solely of white people. Not just that there's white people on the team, not just that there's a white person in the lead, but that there are no genuine perspectives on offer." Um, and I think that's an issue that it's worth raising. A lot of people think that Asians are overrepresented in gaming, but that's, when you look at the numbers, that's just not really true. Obviously, Japan has been a huge powerhouse for a long time. Obviously, Nintendo and Pokemon, Mario, etc., etc. I think there are people listening to this will disagree, but I think there are some perspectives that have been gone untold by the people who own those perspectives for so long that it's important to offer a seat at the table. I'm British, right? I've been in America in total for probably about probably about 3 months of my life, right? In terms of the times I've gone to America. If I was to write a story about an American person, whether they be a trans person, whether they be a cisgender male, whether they be a cisgender whatever, I wouldn't really consider that to be stealing away a perspective, because there are lots of stories about white Americans written by white Americans. If you want to read a story or play a game or do anything in media about a white American person, you can find them that have been written by a white American. I think you would struggle to find a game, especially a game that's got, Sifu is an indie game, but it's got a big spotlight. A lot of people's most anticipated indie game of the year.
Right.
I think you would struggle to find a game like that, a story in this medium that was made by Asian developers, that tells an Asian story, that explores Asian culture, that has gotten the exposure that Sifu has. And I think as an Asian person, not me, this is Kifu, and as an Asian person, being concerned, not saying it's rubbish, not saying we shouldn't buy it, not saying, boycott this game and burn down the studio, but saying this concerns me, and I think journalistically, I think it's important that the people who are hyping this game up are aware of it. This is another game celebrating a culture that often gets celebrated and never gets to tell its own story. I know you can say, Ghost of Tsushima was made by white guys and then they saved the island with the tourist boat. I get that, but also a lot of people in Japan love Ghost of Tsushima, and a lot of people didn't feel it did justice to that very complex time. The Mongolian invasion, it's a very complex time in history. And I think
the armor's all wrong and all the weapons are wrong and everything. But they admit that to their
Sure, right. Yeah, that's the thing. If you just want to play it and have fun and kill people with a samurai sword, that's fine. But they didn't have katanas back then. Katanas were invented something like 200 years later. Haikus or something like 600 years later or something like that. So I think it's important to showcase a viewpoint like Kihun, who says, look, my part of the world often has its stories told, and it rarely gets to tell its stories. I think it's important that when we're looking forward to a game that is about my culture, that's about the area of the world that I'm from, it's important to point out that nobody from my part of the world actually made it. Not don't buy it, not hate it, not send the developers death threats, but it's important, or you might find it important, you might find it interesting or important to bear in mind that I'm not really going to get a chance to tell this story. And I think places like Southeast Asia, and probably places like the Caribbean, probably Native Americans and Inuit Americans, places like that, most of Africa, those are places that get their stories told a lot, and they don't get to tell those stories. Places like Britain and America, and most white Western European countries, places like France, there's lots of stories set in France told by French people that are French. So I think it's worth pointing out that this is another example of a culture having its story told instead of getting to tell it.
That's really, I think, riveting. In my opinion, such a inflammatory headline betrays the nuance. Don't you think? Sifu's Kung Fu Brawling is made by a studio of white developers, but you just eloquently outlined a bunch of different things that could have been used as the subhead's even fine, because it says feeling cautious about how Sifu will turn out eventually.
Yeah, I think you can't be naive and say you should read the article. I understand people just read the headlines. I think this subhead does a lot because it says feeling cautious, and I also think That's a very dry headline. It's entirely nothing in that headline is wrong. It's entirely factual. I
That's
understand.
true.
I
Yeah.
understand that you're saying the way it's arranged, it could have you could have more nuance and say I think this. I personally don't like headlines that say I think. Keyhun writes for the opinion section. It's positioned as we call them the Gamer Originals, which is like what our opinion section's called. I would rather just change it to opinions, but I don't have that power because I would manage it. But I think it's in our opinion section. It's a very factual headline. It comes with a subhead that says "I'm feeling cautious" as opposed to "This is bad." If I'd, you say I'm quite eloquent. I am far less cautious a writer, I think, than Cahoon. I think if I'd written it, I probably would have been more inflammatory, and it would have been to the articles. It would have discredited the article because
Well,
I probably would have been more inflammatory. I think Cahoon did a very good job of explaining the facts very clearly and keeping it factual and pointing out that it was a caution and not a reason to not buy the game.
fair enough. And to your point, I mean, we were talking about Singapore, but of course, with mainland China and Taiwan and Hong Kong and all that, I do appreciate how PlayStation has tried to go on. I think they're calling it the China Hero Project, where they're bringing games out of China. And but you're right, we really don't get introduced. The most Asian games, like the most Asian games, I would think were like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games from Koei back in the day, and then the Musos from Omega Force, and they're
Yeah.
not really great. I mean, so it's there needs to be like a better fusion of quality, storytelling, all these kinds of things, and hopefully that will come out of there soon. Um, that's my hope as well. Um, in closing, I'm curious how you feel this was. I mean, do you feel like this was constructive conversation? Do you think
Yeah,
it's
I
the
think
beginning of something to maybe give people something to think about
beginning
moving
of a
forward?
beautiful friendship. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, look, I think it was constructive. What I wanted to, when I said when I come on here was I think this has been quite a respectful conversation. We've disagreed on a few things. You've raised issues, things that I've said, things that my writers have said. We've discussed them, I think, fairly. Um, I won't really know if it's constructive until it goes out. Really, as
Mm.
I've said, I know that I'm going to get blowback from my side, if you like. I don't really care about that. What I would like is, as I said, people on, I don't want to say your side as in specifically your listeners, but certainly not my side. Um, I think they have an opinion of what journalists are, why journalists are in games, and what they think of games. And if if someone goes to send my writers a death threat or a horrible message saying "you should die, you fat bitch," if me being on this show and I'm going, actually that was them on Moriarty, they're okay them. If my appearance here stops my writer from getting one angry hate message or one death threat or 1 ounce of toxicity, then it was more than worth an hour of my time. And that's what I'll say to everybody who tells me I shouldn't have gone on this show because of all the horrible things I'm sure they'll say about you.
Well, I'm used to it at this point. I think I don't mean to pick on Kihoon, uh, but they said something that I hope is I'm able to respond to with this podcast. They said back on May 1st of last year on Twitter, not sure why anyone is still following Colin Moriarty, but if you are, I'm going to unfollow you for implicitly supporting someone who's making this space worse for anyone who isn't a straight cis white man. That kind of commentary I take personally because think of me what you will about my various political points of view, but the libertarian streak in me has always been very consistent. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what gender you are. I don't care your identity or any of those things. Never have, never will. And I think a lot of people that listen to this show know that. And for some reason, that has become this aura that I have around some people. My hope with this conversation is that while one off can't prove that the rule is not true in this person's mind, that's not what I'm about at all. And you're very welcome here. Again, if you want to come back and we can talk again in the future. But Stacy, in the meantime, how can everyone find you? Tell everyone where, if you want them to be able to find you on Twitter or
Yeah.
and all of those things.
Yeah, that's risky, isn't it, after what I've just said? No, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at 5Tacey. The 5 is spelt with letters instead of numbers, so FIVE and then Tacey, like Stacy, or at thegamer.com.
Excellent. Well, Stacey Henley, the editor-in-chief of thegamer.com. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Good to meet you in person. Well, in this era,
Yeah,
this is
sure.
about as in person as it's going to get. Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand Media. The time we're recording this, something like 12,700 patrons. I mean, that's nuts. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support. We'll keep these conversations coming, keeping you thinking, of course. Keep an open mind. Talk to you next time. Goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.